Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and appliquing can be done in many different ways, and it can be done in many different ways on the machine and by hand. So today, let's do a very simple, basic wool applique, and we're going to design the pattern ourselves, do it on the machine so we can get it done quick and easy, and just have some fun along the way. We can get wool in many different places, fabric stores and quilt stores. You can buy them by the yards, the meters. You can also buy them in bundles like this bundle. And this bundle is from Riley Blake. So the bundle's already pre-cut for us. You can wash your wool first or use it this way. And for this project, I'm going to use it exactly the way it comes. So we're going to need a couple of things. We will need a piece of wool that we're going to put the design on. And we're going to be doing a flower, so we're going to need some colors for the flowers, for some leaves, and a stem. We will also need a background fabric. You can use any size that you would like. If you have small pieces around, you can use that, or you can start with these pre-cuts. The first thing we're going to do is to design our flower. So I'm going to do flower petals, and we're going to cut anywhere between 5 or 6 petals, and we're going to free cut them. So we're going to want about a 2-finger width coming right down that edge. We can put this aside for another project. And you can see I did not measure it. I didn't even cut it straight. We can cut this now into about 6 pieces. And I'm just cutting it apart. And I'm not going to worry about it. Some are big, some are small. From here, I'm going to cut petals. I'm not measuring, I'm just going to take the pair of scissors and cut a petal shape. So I have one petal shape. I can make those petals have a little curve to them. So each petal is going to be unique. I'm going to do some smaller ones. Just cut some petal shapes. The wool is very forgiving and it's very easy to cut and work with. So those are the petals. We can take the ends of the petals and curve them so we do not have any of these sharp points. It'll just be easier to applique. So I'm just going to round them off a bit. So they are sort of kidney shaped, teardrop. So I have my petals. I do want a leaf for my flower. So from the wool, just cut a piece out and make a leaf shape. For this particular project, I do not want any points, because they're a lot easier to work with if you don't have points. And if you don't like that shape, you can always change it. I will also need a stem. From that brown wool, I'm just going to cut a piece out. Round my edges and just give a shape to my stem. The flower will need a center, but I'm going to do the center last. I'm going to take those shapes and put them on my wool. Place the stem down, your leaf down, and let's put those petals around that flower. And we could definitely change those shapes and move them as we need them. If you find that's too many, we can always take one off. We can also turn them over. I do like to rearrange and have some fun. I do not want my petals touching, but I will envision a little circle here in that center. And I can rearrange that stem. I now have one very simple flower. We can put these stitches down by hand, or we can use the machine. I do want to anchor these onto the wool. You can always use a fusible web before you cut them out, but because I was just cutting them out random, I'm going to glue them down with some school glue. And in this case, less glue is better. I just want to put a little bit of glue right around that outside. You can even just blend it with that tip and put our shape back down and go to the next. The glue is just going to hold it down for me. Now if you find your fingers are getting in the way, you can always use tweezers. That will give you a really good control. So glue on all of these pieces. We can bring this to the iron and put a little bit of heat on it to dry that glue. I would recommend putting a pressing cloth over top of it, even a thin piece of cotton. And if you don't want to iron it, that's fine. The glue will dry in a couple of minutes. We can get the machine set up in the meanwhile. Because I do have wool, I would like to use wool thread. Aurifil does sell a beautiful wool thread that can go in a machine. You can buy it individual, but if you really like wool applique, you can get an entire set so you can coordinate your fabric and the thread. Aurifil thread you can buy at your local quilt store, and if they don't have this, they can get it in for you. The other thing to consider are sewing machine needles. We can use a non-stick needle at about a 90-14, and that way that wool will go through that needle. We can also use a top stitch needle, once again 90-14. The thread is a little thicker, so it's going to need that bigger eye for this thread to go through. On the bobbin, we can just put a plain cotton. And the color you're going to need for the bobbin is the color of your background fabric. We're going to change the top colors, but we can use that bobbin in that one color. There are a few different feet that we can use on our machine. Applique feet or embroidery feet. The most common stitch to use to applique these down would be a blanket stitch. The blanket stitch has one stitch that goes down and then into the fabric and back along the edge. Down, back, down. This edge needs to run along the outside of the fabric, so those little bites are going to come inside of the fabric. Because I did not use a lot of glue, I will be using the top stitch needle. I have that foot that is open, and I've moved my stitches so they're going to run right along the edge of that foot. On my Bernina, it's stitch 1329, but use whatever stitch you like on your machine. So I've made this little area a 2.5, and this is 2.6. You could go 2.5, 2.8. We just want little small bites. We need to start and put the needle in on the outside along that edge. We're going to start stitching. We're going to have a stitch that comes down and then a bite that goes over, a stitch down and a bite that goes over. In the edge of this foot, I'm going to follow the edge of that fabric. And you can see how little this little bite of fabric is. I'm going to continue following all the way down. When I come to a corner, I want to pivot. So I'm going to put the needle down on the background fabric where we have one of those straight stitches, and now I can turn that fabric. The next stitch is going to bite into that fabric and then come back. Stop so that you're back on that outside fabric and turn the fabric. We are always going to want to start with the needle in this background fabric, and that's going to help turn those corners nice and smooth. Now we can continue going up to the next side. And that little bit of glue is just holding that on enough so I still have this soft texture, but the fabric's not shifting. That wool thread blends beautifully in with that wool fabric, and you barely see the stitching at all. Let's work on the flowers next. I want to start in the center and go all the way around, finishing in the center. I'm going to follow that edge. If you're left-handed, you might find it easier if you follow that edge of the foot. And slowly work your way around. So you're always pivoting with that needle along this edge. You can see how nice that edge finishes off. Finish all of your petals and your leaf, and we'll work on the center next. Here's the flower all stitched down. We need to do a circle, and I do like to use a measurement with my fingers. I'm going to need a circle. It's going to go about 3 of my fingers. I'm just going to take that and cut it into some type of a circular shape. I'm going to start a little bit big and go down in size until I get it the size and the shape, because I don't necessarily want it completely round. There's a shape I like. I'm going to put a little bit of glue, let it dry, and then stitch around that center. Of course, we can add as many details as we want. We could do some embroidery stitches inside the leaves and petals, but I'm just going to finish this off and cut it out in somewhat of a circle shape. Once the circle is cut out, I'm going to put a little glue and glue this onto a background fabric. I will also be cutting out the background fabric, but not until I finish stitching it. I'm going to stitch along the outside, joining these two pieces. You could continue with that blanket stitch, do a straight stitch, and then a decorative stitch. But I'm going to do a decorative stitch that does that blanket and something on the outside. There's so many different stitches on the machines, it's nice to be able to use them. So I do have, it looks like a little bit of a blanket stitch with this flower. So I'm going to use that center line, and it's going to follow this edge. So I did put a foot on that has a center mark. And that way the center mark is going to be able to follow around this edge. Put the needle down, gently hold this thread out of the way. That center line is going to follow that outside edge. So this stitch is stitching the edge and giving me a decorative along the outside. And I'm going to go all the way around. And that's that decorative stitch when it's all done. By having that extra piece of wool on the back, it covers all of the stitching that we did, and it has a nice finish. We could leave it this way, but I'm going to cut all the way around the outside, just leaving a little bit of fabric. My freeform flower is now done. I just have that little edge peeking out with that pretty decorative stitching, and that's all there is to making this freeform flower. And that wool is beautiful to work with. If you enjoy working with wool or would like to try some different wool appliques, there's a great publication to make these really cute little candle mats. We could also use them for coffee cups. So there's a whole season of them. The patterns are in there and the directions. And they're nice and small, so they're handy little projects to do. And if you really like appliquing and you want to learn more about it, there is a publication that really covers just about everything. It talks about color and shapes, tools of the trade, freezer paper method, gluing method, stitching method, great guides on different stitches that you can use and how to turn those corners. And there's some patterns in the back for you to try out. These freeform flowers are a lot of fun to make. They're quick, they're easy, and because we are not following a pattern, every single one is going to be very unique. I do hope you give some wool applique a try. And thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe and come on back. Let's see what we're making next time in the sewing room. Bye for now.